You don't just brainstorm and come up with ideas. That's probably the worst way to find an idea to work on. You find a space you're interested in, and you find problems as you gain proximity to that space.
Hey. Hi. Welcome back to the Wild Business Growth Podcast. This is your place to hear from a new entrepreneur every single Wednesday morning who's turning wild ideas into wild growth. I'm your host, Max Brandstetter, post-bachelor party, thank you very much. And I am the founder and podcast producer at Max Podcasting. This is episode 210, which is how much I can bench with one arm blindfolded on a bad day. Just kidding, don't try that. And today's guest is Nick Fogle. Nick is a co-founder of Wavve, one of my favorite podcasting tools ever. Creates those fantastically amazing audiograms you see all across social media. And he also is the founder and CEO of Churnkey, which I appreciate the pun in the name. We talk a little bit about that, but they are all about making it as easy as possible for business owners to reduce churn. In this episode, we talk everything from Nick's journey, thinking he was going to be a lawyer, to changing up quite a bit, dealing with a ton of student loans debt there, getting into the world of entrepreneurship and how to reduce self-doubt, how to experiment and find problems that you might back your way into that you can build businesses around, and even some Better Call Saul and Severance. It is Fogle. Enjoy the show. Alrighty, we are here with Nick Fogle, the dude behind one of my favorite podcast marketing products of all time, Wavve, Wavve, as well as your newer baby, Churnkey. But serial entrepreneur, super cool dude. We were talking about, we probably crossed paths at Podcast Movement back in 2018 in Orlando before that, or 2019 actually. But Nick, thanks so much for joining. How you doing today?
Thanks for having me, Max. I'm doing great. Looking forward to getting on here and chatting with you a bit.
Perfect. Cool. I mean, you're doing great already. So, like, if that's like the goal, just get on and chat. Like, you nailed it. But we're going to talk about Wavve. We're going to talk about Churnkey. But before that, I heard that you basically taught yourself to code. I don't know why I said it that weird. Basically, taught yourself to code while you were working as a shuttle driver, like in breaks in the job. How did? Just explain that. That's amazing.
It's kind of the Nick Fogle origin story, I think. Just to rewind the clock and provide some context around that, I had I'm a kind of middle of the tier millennial, born in 1986, and I was an ambitious guy in college. I said, okay, like I'm going to study economics and I'm going to graduate early in 2008. I had interviews with Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, these different banking institutions, and if anybody can remember what happened in the fall of 2008. The bottom fell out, particularly in banking. Horrible time. You know, you would think you need economists during this period of time. Nobody wanted an economics major. So, all right, what am I going to do? Well, I worked at Walmart for a little bit and I said, enough of this. Like, you know, I got to find a real job. I'm going to go to law school. So I kind of like doubled down on education and made a bad situation way worse by going to law school and taking on tremendous amount of debt. And then I graduated in law school, like 2012 law school. I did not like practicing law. Eventually I hit a point where I was like, I can't even pay off my student loan interest payment with the amount of money I'm making as an attorney. So here's where it gets really crazy. You know, you think you're already struggling, you know, you're an attorney, like, you know, stick with it. But I was depressed. I was miserable. I remember just driving down. I live in Charleston, which is a beautiful area, but I remember just driving down and like crying to myself, parked alone on the Battery. I was just, you know, I'd never felt that disenchanted, like unhappy with where I was, feeling totally stuck. At this point too, I was like, we're about to get evicted from our apartment complex. I was newly married. My wife worked at a nonprofit. It was a bad situation. So I was desperate and I put a housing wanted ad out on Craigslist. And I said, tried to hit like all the right boxes, like non-smoker, no pets, stable married couple, like all that stuff. And, we really got blessed in this total Hail Mary. I mean, we could have found like a serial killer or something, with a housing wanted ad, but this woman, she built a guest house. They lived far out in a remote area, but they built a guest house for her parents who had unfortunately passed away before anybody could live in the guest house. She said, we've never rented it out, but your message, I saw your message randomly. It spoke to me and I want to give this to you for $1,000 a month, all utilities included. And we said, this is it. Like, we've got to do this. Here's the catch. This is out toward Kiowa Island, which is, if you know anything about South Carolina geography, I doubt many listeners do. It's very remote. It's like 45 minutes from the middle of nowhere. Like it's just like beautiful, but it's remote.
Real quick, is that where the golf tournament is?
Yes.
Is that, yeah.
So
okay. I knew it sounded familiar.
Most people
in that.
The PGA Tour, like most people are aware of Kiowa as this beautiful golf resort. And, that was the only place where I could find a job as like a shuttle driver at this resort. So here I was, with a prestigious law degree, becoming an attorney. I have my economics background and had always been, striving and ambitious. And I'd realized though that I don't want to do law. I don't know what I want to do. I was like kind of down and out. And I swear this was like such an inflection point in my pathway. And I think a lot of listeners may identify with this idea of, you do everything that you think you're supposed to do. You grow up, your parents say, be a doctor, be a lawyer. Those are the best callings you could possibly have. I think this is particularly true for millennials who like grew up and there were these very clear routes that you should take. You go to college, you get a 4-year degree, you do these things. And here I was, 25, I guess at this point, got married, I'd checked all the boxes and that story and narrative had not panned out for me. So I was like, I'm going to reset and I'm going to do something that seems unconventional. I'd always been creative and I had these startup ideas, things I wanted to work on. And I had reached out to a few people to help me build this like legal education startup I wanted to build. And of course, this is a naive founder and people who've tried to do this may identify you have an app idea and you reach out to developers and say, hey, I've got this wonderful idea. Will you be my business partner and help me build it? I'll give you like 30% of the company or something. Nobody is going to take a risk. No decent developer is going to take a risk on, some unknown founder with an idea. So I was like, well, I guess I can teach myself to code. If there's one thing law school taught me, it's how to teach yourself, big, dense volumes of information. So
I thought you were going to say that if there's one thing law school taught me, it's how to code. And I was like, wait a second. That's the biggest twist I've ever heard.
Well, I will say that, a lot of people are intimidated by learning to program because you think this is like a very math-based discipline. That's the assumption people have. But if you have any aptitude for linguistics or language, I think modern programming languages are more conducive to people that are good at language. If you understand, grammar and language and syntax and choosing the right word, and if you're building a narrative or a story and you know how different things can change the way things work. And for law, this is fascinating. But if you're in law school, you learn how to look at a statute and figure out, if this, then this is, punishment, for instance. Well, that is a very fundamental programming type of rule set, right? Like it's all rules at the bottom. So that hunch isn't too far off. If anything, law school taught me how to really think deeply about language and constructs. And it also helped me to learn how to work hard and teach myself. Now, if I were to rewind the clock, I would not have gone to law school. So don't go to law school if you want to be a programmer. Don't go to, I would even caution you and say, you may not have to go to undergrad and take out loans if you want to be a programmer. So anyway, this is a long saga of my origin, but I think people do identify with this. Like you feel like you're stuck in an impossible situation. You've got to make ends meet, but you want to do something different. And I used this period of time where I was driving a shuttle and in between pickups, I would bring my phone at the time. I even had like very low data limits on my phone. It was so poor. I think now it's pretty much unlimited for people, but I would tether that to my laptop. I'd hide it in my shuttle so my bosses and people didn't see like I was doing this on the job. I'd pull it out and I would like do Codecademy, I think was one of the early tools you could use back then to learn. And I just had this startup I was building. So I just worked on it and like figured things out. And I think that's the best way if you have a startup idea and want to learn to program. Don't just go through lessons mindlessly. Start building something and then just Google your way to figuring out how to build that. And for me, it was kind of a means to an end, and that like of course I wasn't going to be able to build this ambitious startup idea as a brand new programmer. That's a tall order. But I learned that I love programming. I love that power that it gives you to create something from scratch. Like with law, you can't just like write a contract and see how it benefits the world. But with code, you can do that. You can write something and immediately see people use it and enjoy it. It was a very fundamental shift in like, wow, I can build something today. People can use that tomorrow versus a contract. Like maybe that'll never, come into, I hope it never, with a contract, you don't ever want that to, enter a courtroom. If you do your job right, it should never get there. From that point, teaching myself the code in the shuttle took me like 6 months to actually get decent. But when this is your sole focus and you start finding something you really like, you can get pretty good at something pretty quickly. And I was lucky enough to get an internship at a company called Blackbaud, which is a big publicly traded nonprofit organization here in Charleston. They got me an internship making like, I think it was $15 an hour or something. That to me, that was more money than I'd ever made. And I was like, I'm going to prove to these people that I am hungry and I will do whatever it takes. So I worked really hard in that internship and eventually it turned into a full-time job. And I just like was really ambitious and kind of grew up through the organization over a few years.
And look back now and you've built and sold multiple companies based off of if-then statements. So it all came in handy. but that's really, really cool that you found this new love of programming at the perfect time. Like when you were, people say down and out or like just a tough time in your life and you were looking for something else that was just going to get you inspired. And there it was. So who knew it would have been coding in between shuttle rides and the fantasy golf island.
Yeah,
but,
for real.
If you look back now, from the time in the shuttle to those early years at Blackbaud, was there anything that kind of foreshadowed the fact that you would be actually starting companies one day?
This is funny. I've always been one of these people that I tend to be more introverted. You mentioned podcast movement. You probably met my co-founder because he's like, with Wavve, he was the very extroverted marketing guy, Bayard Hall. And I've always been more introverted. I'm not shy, but I like to, I get drained in these, big conferences and physical events and stuff. So that's been my personality my whole life, where like, if we're in a, small setting, shuttle ride, very conversational and can make deep relationships with people, and just have a great conversation with these people I'd pick up. And, when you're driving a shuttle, you meet so many interesting people, and a resort like Kiawah, it's international business owners. And I would just talk to them and ask them questions and share my ideas and what I'm trying to do and, where I am in life. And, there were several people that said things like, I believe you're going to do something really big one day. And I was like, wow, like that meant a lot. And part of me, that doubting side that I think everybody has to some extent would be like, the negative voice in my head saying, these guys don't really know that like you're a big faker. You're never going to do that, but you try to silence those voices and you think about it and say, wow, like this is a person who has succeeded in business. And they're telling me based on this brief interaction that like, I'm going to be able to do that one day. Those were incredibly encouraging things. And I think that is transferable to anybody. If you have an idea and you want to talk to people about it and share it and look to the market and look to experienced business people to help kind of validate that. And I think that's one of the best things you can do early on is ask questions and share things that you're working on.
So I'm going to keep asking questions. I'm really taking your advice to heart. But let's move to some of your entrepreneurial journeys or parts of your entrepreneurial journey. So there's plenty that you did even in between Blackbaud and Wavve. But I want to jump to Wavve because it's especially interesting and intriguing to me just because it's literally one of the tools that still to this day I use often several times a day during the week. And for anybody who follows me on social media or has ever seen a little clip, an audiogram of the Wild Business Growth podcast shared out or any other podcast shared out, for a fact, mine and my clients are using Wavve to create those audiograms, Wavve. And many people in the podcasting space are using Wavve. So it's a really, really cool tool. And I know it's evolved so much over the years, but you were involved in the very, very early days as a co-founder. How did you get from the nonprofit in the tech space to creating something that would eventually be used by this curious podcasting industry?
Oh, yeah. I'm going to give you the shorter version.
We're going to create 75 Wavve clips of this interview, by the way.
Let's do it. You're on the maximum plan, right? You're on the agency plan, the top tier pro plan.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and when I look at the podcast artwork that you have, I'm trying to remember. I know I've seen this before, and I feel like you must have been very early, because when you're starting a business, there's a period where you know all of the customers. Do you remember if you signed up when we were like helping people manually create these?
It was a little bit after that, but I definitely worked heavily with support early on.
Yeah.
And I'll have to go back, and I'll put in the show notes. I'll have to go back and research when I first started using Wavve. But I remember like early on after launching the podcast, I got a referral from someone on Twitter like, hey, this Wavve is a pretty cool new thing.
The reason I mentioned that, there was a period at Wavve where we were like manually creating all of the artwork for the videos. But just to rewind a bit, I was working a full-time job. I had all of this student loan debt, and it was like growing. I couldn't even pay all the interest on it. Even with this new Blackbaud senior engineer salary I had, I realized I've got to just start something. If I ever want to pay down this tremendous debt, I need to place some asymmetric bets. And one of those that I'd always wanted to do is get back to startups. And I had all these ideas. My wife was tired of hearing about them, I imagine. And one of her friends was tired of her husband hearing about all of, his ideas. So they were like, you guys just need to get together and like hash out these ideas. So my co-founder, Baird, and I started to get to know each other by meeting up at Starbucks.
Wait, so Baird was that other annoying husband?
Yeah, he was. Our wives introduced us kind of. And we started meeting at Starbucks and talking about ideas. And our first idea, this was right around the time that Serial came on the scene, and we were getting really into podcasts. This was like 2015, I think.
Okay, the podcast Serial, not like Frosted Flakes.
Yeah, not Frosted Flakes, although I'm sure they have a podcast now.
Yeah, that's very sweet.
Yeah, it's Sarah Koenig and like Serial and all these like big podcasts were popping up. And I loved listening to these on the way to work, and we wanted to talk about them. And we were like, how cool would it be if you could engage with other podcast listeners in audio format? We started thinking more about this idea and thinking there needed to be like a Reddit for audio, which again, this is a very ambitious idea. If you are a team of two, you don't have any like external funding or VC connections. And back then, 2015, it was obviously way pre-COVID. So it mattered where you were. We weren't going to raise venture money in Charleston, but we were too naive to realize that. So we spent 2 years building this really fancy Reddit for audio tool called UTalk. That was the name of it originally, UTalk. And bad name. We were eventually sued for trademark infringement that we didn't. I should have known, being the attorney, but these are the things you do when you're moving it. You can't.
Yeah. What is your counsel thinking?
Well, you can't think like, this is another thing. When you're building a startup, you can't think like an attorney because you would never start. There's so many risks. It's like, it almost hurts you more than it helps you in the early stages. So yeah, we built this app and we had people using it and it was so validating. And the users were like, build this, build that. And we got some podcasts that were paying us a little bit of money each month. But ultimately, we couldn't raise money. We could not monetize it. And without venture money, like, we can't work for free forever. We'd left our jobs at one point, and I was doing a lot of consulting work. And as a Hail Mary, though, before we like shut that down, I was like, there's got to be a way to like make this go viral. And around the time WNYC, big, they've got, I think Radiolab is one of their podcasts, big, podcast organization. They had created this open source tool. It was the first thing that I'd ever seen that lets you create an audiogram. And I looked at that open source project on GitHub, and there were all of these podcasters that were like, I want to use this. How do I use this? And there was no way for a non-technical person to be able to use this thing. So I was like, I'm going to just create this and set it up for a bunch of our existing communities. So I pulled an all-nighter, released the ugliest looking thing ever after just one night. And we started sharing that. And immediately people were like, how do I do this? How do I do this? So after a few weeks, we realized like, we're onto something here. Like, people are willing to pay for this. So we were the first people to commercialize the Audiogram, take what they had built and then like go way beyond what they built and build it for, everyday podcasters to quickly upload their artwork and add their snippet of the show snippet that they wanted to share and choose a different design. And immediately they had something that they could share. So that is how Wavve was born. We said, all right, well, this, giant thing we've been building for 2 years, we couldn't generate much money from that, but within a few weeks, we've already, raised a few $100s just from selling this to people we know. Cool thing about Wavve is this got virality built in. So you add a watermark to it, people see it on social, and they go to your website. So in some regards, it's like, all right, well, you got super lucky building that, and there's definitely luck involved. But for your listeners out there, the lesson that I take away from that whole experience was that if you are passionate about a space and you work in that space long enough, eventually you will find a problem that you can solve and people will pay for. And for us, we thought we had found a problem. And actually, Clubhouse, Twitter Spaces, what we built was that, but we could never have built that ourselves. We needed venture money. We found this problem though, that audio does not share well on social media. That was the problem. And Wavve helped to address that problem. So we just started building, and over time we grew and grew and grew. I still had a day job through all of that because I had crazy student loans. So I, from 9 to 5, I would, do my consulting gig or, my day job, and nights, weekends, I used my PTO. Eventually I had another job and I used PTO to build Wavve features. So for about 3 or 4 years, that was my life, is work all the time, but it paid off. It paid off in a big way. Looking back, I wouldn't do anything differently.
Yeah, I love stories like this where it's like a founder started a business, they think it's going in this direction, and then they find something that's like completely different, or maybe it's a little part of the business, and they're like, oh my God, this is it. This is really like the new business. And we had a while back, we had Stacy Madison, who is the Stacy from Stacy's Pita Chips on.
Oh wow.
And she had a little food cart where they serve like pita sandwiches and pita dishes, and they just decided to like toast up these, pieces of pita one day and sell them to people, and people were like, this stuff is amazing. And she built another business that was inspired, like same sort of thing in the bar space. But it's almost like mentally, it feels like a giant weight lifted off your chest when you like just feel like a natural fit of this is the direction we need to go. This is it. When you look at all the growth that Wavve has had since you started building it, what would you point to as being the biggest factors in actually, getting exposed to more people and getting more podcasters to sign up?
I think there were two things two inflection points in this business, and just some additional context is helpful. When you've spent 2 years building something and it flops, you become more risk averse to what you build. And one thing Baird and I realized through that venture was like, we need to be very intentional about building things that provide ROI, not just, what do users ask for? What do we think people are willing to pay for? And we adopted that. We call it the Moneyball approach. I don't know if people have seen the movie Moneyball, but it's about, they take this very analytical, data-driven approach to, dealing with a small budget. And we started operating that way. So one big factor was initially, as we were trying to figure out, is do we really go all in on this product? What we were doing at that point was anytime somebody wanted to create an account, they'd pay us. Then they'd send us their album artwork. There wasn't even like a builder. You couldn't create your own artwork within Wavve. They would send us the artwork. We would create these designs for them, ask them, what style waveforms do you want? We'd set that up, and then they'd come back. And this was a big factor. It's like, wow, if people are willing to wait a day and still pay us, and that's how bad they wanted it, that validated the market demand. This, very rudimentary product, very, rough experience. And we did that for like 9 months. Baird left to go to Europe with his wife, and I was alone dealing with all the support requests. And I said,
oh, thanks so much, Baird.
Well, he had been the one setting up most of the stuff. So I hadn't had to feel the brunt of this. I'd do a few here and there previously, but I was building all of them. And I said, this is awful. Like, this is not scalable at all. Like, we just can't do this. So I was like, all right, I'm going to spend a month and I'm going to create an editor where everybody can just sign up and build their own. That was a huge inflection point. We also found our third business partner on Upwork. Had no idea that we'd actually find somebody that was that high quality on Upwork, but we did. And eventually we ended up making him a partner because his quality work was so good. So that all happened around the same time where we brought him on. I built this editor. We were moving more quickly, building features. And that kind of launched us up to where we were doing $2,000 a month in recurring revenue. Still not a lot of money. We couldn't, pay the bills with that by any stretch of the imagination, but it was like the right movement we needed to see. The second inflection point was it goes back to this whole like ROI based approach where we were like, let's add a watermark. And I mentioned that earlier, but when we added the watermark for all the free accounts, it enabled us to like be more aggressive with offering free as an option for people. So we got all these people that wanted to use the free tier, and that wasn't, a total loss for us because they were creating stuff that had the Wavve watermark, and that generated a lot of interest. The final inflection point that really changed things was we started hitting from on the engineering side, video generation is very expensive and difficult to do. And I had like 12 of these different servers, 12 different machines that were like handling it. And every day I'd be like in there rebooting them, trying to fix them manually. Another thing, that business process where people say you do things that don't scale early until you validated it. And, a year after I built the editor, we just could not scale. So I created a new way to handle this and use some new technology to do that. And that made it where people, instead of waiting an hour for their for their video to generate, it could happen in 5 minutes or 10 minutes maximum for an hour.
I was going to say, because just especially like days that are really super busy, I will track how long it takes to do it. And it's within minutes these days. Like, it's amazing what you can do. And often I'll do a bunch of Wavve clips back to back to back. You can batch them and knock out a ton.
Yeah. And that was not possible for. In fact, if somebody uploaded like if Joe Rogan had used his, I think early on we got like Dave Ramsey, we got a few of these that were like really big name podcasts, and they had like a few episodes that were very long. And I'd be like, "Oh, Dave, like, what are you doing? You bogged down all my servers again, And
I was going to say, you turned into Guilfoyle from the show Silicon Valley, of running around Guilfoyle. Like the garage is on fire.
I was Guilfoyle. I had all my servers up there, and granted they weren't physical.
Did you have a name for your servers?
They weren't physical. I didn't, but I viewed it as like a very personal attack when a customer who was paying us uploaded something and we couldn't handle it. It's like, oh, why'd you do this? But that's part of scaling, though, is you got to figure these problems out. And we were the first ones to create out of all the video generation apps I knew of at the time, we were the first ones to build a system that it would actually take a video, chop it up into like a ton of 7-second clips, process it all, and then put it all back together on the fly. So instead of doing an entire video, it would be like 1,000 little videos and put it all back together. So that's how that worked. And that was that final inflection point that was like, wow, like now people realized how quickly they could create things, and it was off to the races. So after that, we grew to like probably $30,000 or $40,000 a month in monthly recurring revenue.
Yeah. I mean, the product's okay. I mean, I don't use it that much. No, it's amazing. And yeah, the quality is obviously grown a lot over time. But even from the start, I remember thinking like, wow, this is like really, really cool technology. And then I think over time you made the user interface and just ease of use like so much easier and quicker. I was like, this is amazing. Like it's such a unique function what it provides for podcasters. That's waves on waves of Wavve. You can tell I like puns. But somehow you sold Wavve and evolved from Wavve to Churnkey. So first of all, what do you think is the top reason that you were able to successfully sell Wavve?
When you build a business and it's profitable, you start getting, and we also were public, we would share milestones because there's this whole like indie hacker bootstrap movement where the community supports one another in these efforts to, build products and do it yourself without, a big amount of fundraising. Those things tend to, if you fundraise, it goes on TechCrunch. Everybody hears about those. And we were pretty early to this indie hacker movement, and we would share our revenue publicly and we'd share our growth publicly. And in 2019, we got 2 calls in January of that year. The first one was from Spotify. And we were like, whoa, like we were just blown away. It was Spotify's business development. They were looking at making acquisitions. They were just getting into podcasting back then. And we were like, we're set for the rest of our lives. Spotify is going to acquire us. And ultimately, they realized how small we were, I think. And we're like, all right, like the legal paper we were going to use to do this deal is not worth it. But that same month, like a week later, we got an inbound from somebody who wanted to acquire the business for, it was like right at about 7 figures. And this was hard for me to say no to. It's one thing to have a business and believe in the business and where it's going. But it's another thing to be financially strapped, not having a lot of resources. And to me, that would have paid off my loans, helped me catch up on retirement. And fortunately, Baird was in a very different place financially. And he was like, he saw things a little more clearly. And he was like, hey, like, let's look back at, where we've come, where we're going. and, maybe we could sell this in a few years. And we took a few days to really think heavily on this decision. And we realized like, okay, yeah, like there's no reason to rush and sell now. Let's give this a year and see what we can do to get it ready to sell. Because if we were optimizing this business to sell, we could sell it for a lot more. About 6 months later, we approached the broker that had represented this buyer and said, hey, could you represent us now? And like, we didn't know anything about selling a business or brokers. And they were like, yeah, like, there's no longer a conflict or anything. The buyer had gone away. So they were like, oh, they went over our numbers and they said, your churn rate is 13%, which is, it's pretty high when you're looking at businesses. And part of it was the nature of podcasting. In general, you have a lot of podcasters that say, hey, I want to start a podcast. And then they end it after 3 episodes. I have tremendous respect for podcasters who can actually start and be consistent every week. And even when they're not seeing results, it's a very, very difficult thing to do. Just keep at it consistently. And with Wavve, that was one of the bigger things we faced was people that would do a short season, they'd pause, they want to stop, and then they'd come back, or they'd just stop altogether. And we realized if we were going to sell Wavve, we needed to handle this problem of churn, figure out a way to bring it down. So over a year, we kept growing, but churn was it was a problem that did not go away. And as you grow larger, that becomes more of a threat to your growth. Like eventually you'll plateau. You won't pass that. So we paid $30,000 to this churn consultant. We were desperate. It didn't really move the needle. And we started tweaking things internally. And, if you spend a lot of time in subscription apps, web apps, different tools, most companies spend a lot of time on onboarding, on activation. You'll get this drip email sequence to like make sure you get started, but nobody ever focused on offboarding. If you give all these customers attention up front, why aren't you personalizing the offboarding experience to, number one, try to figure out why they're leaving? They're going to click the dreaded cancel button. There is a reason for why they're leaving. So why not just ask them? And then the second thing we realized over time was, knowing our customers. Podcasters have seasons typically, and there are periods of time where they just want to take a break and they don't want to pay for a tool if they're taking a month off or 2 months off. So we introduced the ability to, when they're leaving, if the reason was, I'm not using it right now, offer them a pause and say, hey, you keep all your credits, you keep all your account just the way it is, but for 2 months, we won't charge you. Just come back and pick up your account the way it was when you left off. Keep all of your usage credits. Another thing that was very helpful was discounting. This is a controversial thing that some people feel weird about, but we realized not every customer has the same financial sensitivity. People have different budgets. Budgets fluctuate over time. So, based on our customer, maybe we could try a different discount, see if that can keep them a little bit longer, because it's expensive to bring customers in. And you want to keep those customers as long as you can. So we found a series of these different offers that we could give people based on why they were leaving. And that had tremendous implications for our core business. We cut churn from 13% to 8%. And if you're a math person, this is hard. If you're not a math person, this is kind of hard to wrap your brain around, but the compounding effect of recurring revenue when you can cut churn by even a small percentage is amazing. So over the next year or so, we grew Wavve to almost $150,000 in monthly recurring revenue. A lot of that was directly due to churn reduction strategies. And also COVID brought in a lot of people that were starting podcasts and working from home more. So yeah, and that is the origin story of Churnkey.
I was going to say, so really your experience at the tail end of your Wavve journey, like it was almost like churn was organically created just from the stuff that you were seeing on the and in the Wavve business.
Yeah, and the idea for this is something too that a lot of people when I come on podcasts, I always at the end I give them my Twitter handle and say DM me, and all the time I get people saying, "How do you create ideas?" or "How do you get ideas for a startup?" You don't just brainstorm and come up with ideas. That's probably the worst way to find an idea to work on. You find a space you're interested in, and you find problems as you gain proximity to that space. So, Wavve came out of our proximity to podcasting, radio, the audio space. Churnkey came out of our experience running a business. And we were, really tied into this community of other founders. And churn is a problem for everybody. A lot of people put their head in the sand because each churn is like a breakup. Somebody leaves and it's very personal. And a lot of people want that automated. They don't want to look at every customer that's canceled and try to win them back. So it was some psychology and a lot of just business processes. So we realized, okay, well, Wavve is in a really good place. We started getting acquisition offers at the end of 2020. We received 5 offers on Christmas Eve, and we did not solicit these offers. It was like at the end of COVID, all this money had been on the sidelines that would normally have been spent on acquisitions. And I think everybody at the end of the year was like, okay, the world's not ending. Let's find some companies and make some acquisitions. And we were very fortunate to have grown a lot, have conquered churn that year. The thinking though was like, okay, we've got a great business here. We love the product. We love podcasters and it's still growing. Why would you give up a business like this? And it really comes to, it's a very personal decision. Like I had a 2-year-old and I was working like crazy still. And Baird had a little one on the way, I think. Yeah, if I remember correctly. So we were starting families and we realized we're not great operators of this type of business. We'd been working in the space for so long. We just felt like it was time to find it a new home and have people that were more operationally focused to take ownership and build some of the things that we had not built yet. The last thing is we were thinking about our net worth, and like when you start a business and grow it, this was like 99% of my net worth at that point. So it was just like the prudent thing would be to say, let's find a new home. The last thing though that's important to note is like when you're facing something like that, I've seen a lot of situations where people sell their business and then they're lost. Like, what do I do next? And we knew like we want to keep building businesses. So we were like, well, what would we build? And we realized that we've built this tool that's so amazing and instrumental for founders. And we love working with other business founders and understanding their businesses and helping them. We said, let's make Churnkey its own product. So we kind of took everything we'd learned from, this churn tool we built internally for Wavve. We broke it out. We added a bunch of features. We made it so other businesses could like hook up to it and start receiving the same benefits. We kind of did a beta period and the results were phenomenal. It worked even better for some of these other businesses that we were testing. And we said, all right, well, we're going to sell Wavve in March of 2021. The deal will be closed. Let's launch Churnkey publicly. And that's the origin story of Churnkey and like how we entered into this new space of going from helping podcasters create to helping other businesses with their churn problem.
And every now and then, cough, cough, you get a podcaster who has a business as well. So very
cool. Well, and I think all podcasters, most podcasts could be a business if you're in a niche. That's what I love about podcasters in general is they're all very entrepreneurial and love the idea of creating something. Entrepreneurs and podcasters are like the same people in my book.
Yeah, it's incredible. It is like your own business, and now we got a business that's helping out everybody with their own businesses. So it gets very
meta.
Wave after wave. But anyway, it's super cool that it came out of Wavve as well. And so the Churnkey today, at the time of this recording, what is the most valuable thing that you offer for other business owners in order to reduce churn in their company?
We totally automate the whole process of retention and churn recovery. So instead of having to, there are a few things you can do that are awful. One is just like throw your hands up in the air and say, these users didn't value our product to begin with. That's an assumption that we have to counter in a lot of situations. People are fixated on this idea that if somebody leaves, they weren't a good fit for the product. And I have to say, no. Like there are a variety of reasons that people leave. And with Churnkey, we help, there is a big educational component in what we do when we'll get on a call with the business and help them understand. And I'll say, hey, are you doing anything after somebody clicks that dreaded cancel button? Are you just saying, all right, see you later? Or are you saying like, I want to learn as much as I can about why you're leaving. I, truly value each customer and I want to learn about this. And I want to meet you where you are as a customer and figure out if there's something I can offer to help you stay. So like that whole process of just saying, it takes 15 minutes, click a button, add this tiny little snippet of code to your site, and we will do all of the rest for you. That is the value of Churnkey. You could spend 6 months building a very basic version of this yourself, which is what we did at Wavve. It actually, the problem with doing that is it takes you away from your core business. With Wavve, we should have been focused on building better tools for podcasters to create video. And instead, we spent like 6 months working on this very operational issue with our billing system. And retaining people. If something like Churnkey had existed, we would have never built it. We would have just installed it, but it didn't. So we built it ourselves, and now it's available for other companies. And just last thing I'll note on this topic, earlier I mentioned the thing about like, you don't really have original ideas. They come out of solving a pain point. As we were thinking about churn with Wavve and figuring out like, how do big companies solve this problem? And we thought about Netflix and Hulu, other big businesses that have large teams and are focused on every ounce of revenue. And they had things like this that obviously the user experience is really bad on a lot of those. Like it's like a dark pattern that sends you down a labyrinth of like 20 different forms. But we were like, we can do something like that, make it better, more user-friendly, and learn from what they're doing. And that's where we got the idea. And we've just continued to improve and innovate on that.
I have to commend you, by the way. Obviously, I'm a big fan of puns. I didn't even notice at first the pun in
Churnkey.
The company name. Churnkey. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, I forget it. When you're so used to your company name, you forget why it's that. But it's a turnkey solution to solving churn. Yep.
Perfect. Well, you should just, instead of calling it Churnkey, you should just call it a turnkey solution for solving churn. That really rolls off the tongue right there.
I love that. I'll give you credit if we move to that.
Perfect. Cool. And you can, probably how to file the trademarks and all that. But looking back now that you've built, I mean, at least 3 businesses now, you've been entrepreneurial in a number of ways. What is the biggest entrepreneurial lesson you would say that has helped you to start and sell and grow companies? You've
got to stick with it. Yesterday for Churnkey, for instance, we had a big product release and it was hard. We had some issues and we had a competitor, make a comment about what we were releasing, and we lost a big customer. And, there are so many ups and downs when you're early in a company. And Wavve was a great example too, where, it took us 18 months to get to $2,000 in recurring revenue. If you're pursuing any kind of entrepreneurial pursuit, if you're building a startup or a podcast, you have to stick with it and just show up every day and do the work, and trust that over time, if you listen to the market or your customers and you just stick with it, even if that business idea is not panning out for you, you will learn enough to pivot, change your direction, and eventually you're going to reach the point of having a profitable, successful business. So yeah, I think that's the best thing I can tell founders is startups, they say, you run out of money, you have like infighting with founders. I think a lot of that can be distilled down into pacing yourself, showing up every single day, doing the work, and just trusting that if you're doing the right things, and the right things are subjective, but you're mostly listening to the market, eventually it's going to pay off.
And speaking of listening, I have something for you to help with your podcast, the world of podcasting, which involves listening. You've heard me speak in previous episodes about the Podcasting to the Max newsletter. Well, now we officially have a lead magnet for the Podcasting to the Max newsletter. And I know a lot of people they kind of like try to hide the fact that it's a lead magnet, but let's face it, that's what it is. This has fantastic value for you if you are interested in starting a podcast or getting better at editing your podcast. So it is called How to Edit Your Podcast in Audacity. And you can access it by signing up at maxpodcasting.com/newsletter. That's maxpodcasting.com/newsletter. Sign up, hit confirm once you get the email that, asks you to opt in and all that, yada, yada, yada. And you will receive how to edit your podcast in Audacity. And you probably already forgot it's a lead magnet by now until I just reminded you right now. So anyway, let's get back to some waves in the form of rapid fire Q&A. So let's pave our way to wrap up with some rapid fire Q&A. You ready for it?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, let's get wild. One of my favorite movies of all time is Superbad, and the character McLovin, his name is Fogle. Did anybody ever in the past couple decades make fun of you in the vein of McLovin? Yeah,
I was a lowly intern at the big law office, and law firms can be kind of like frat boy. A lot of these guys, it's especially where I am, Charleston. A lot of it is kind of like a it's like an old boys club and like frat guys. And I didn't like it. And they loved the idea. They would just call me McLovin. They were like, McLovin, you know, what deals do we have today? Or, and I've had a number of people in college, you know, it's funny too, because I went and saw that movie in theaters, and when I can't remember if it's the scene with his ID or if I forget if they were just calling him that, but yeah, instantly
he had the Hawaii ID. Yeah. He had the Hawaii ID where the only name was McLovin, not first name, last name.
He's such an endearing character that it's like, it's not even all that negative. In fact, too, when I got married, my brother-in-law called me that for like 4 or 5 years, like the first 5 years I was married, I think he called me McLovin.
Oh my God. It's amazing what popular movies can do.
I know.
Well, I'm very sorry to bring up some dark memories there. I didn't know you were teased about it, but he is a absolutely legendary character in a legendary movie. So I had to ask.
The teasing is all in good fun. It's funny because Fogle is one of these last names that it's just common enough that most people have like met somebody with the last name. But if you've seen that movie, that's what you're going to remember. Great movie.
Speaking of movies, let's get to movies and shows. Besides Better Call Saul, which is one
oh
of
my gosh,
at the time,
did you
at the
finish
time of
it?
the recording, yeah,
Oh,
I did. Yes, that, without giving away. Yeah.
You like it better than Breaking Bad?
I got to start Breaking Bad again soon, like from the start, because watching these now, I'm like, there's no way this is better than Breaking Bad. But Better Call Saul towards the end got really good, so I don't know.
I think it's better. I think it's better because it's more optimistic.
Well, they had more to work with as well.
That's true.
Yeah.
And you knew where it was going as an audience, but that even still, it was better. Like you knew what was going to happen. But in my opinion, it's better because of Jimmy's character, Bob Odenkirk. It's so endearing, and you just like, you can't help but identify with him on some level and want to root for him. And you know the way it goes toward the end, you know where it's going. And the whole time you're like, how's it going to get there? It's brilliant. I liked it better.
Yeah, I just think Vince Gilligan is like one of the evil geniuses of the past century, or maybe the past millennium. But anyway, besides Better Call Saul, so I'm putting a tough filter on it. What is your favorite movie or TV show that involves lawyers?
Ooh, I don't like a lot of like lawyer dramas because it paints this like exciting view of the practice of law, and it entices people to come to the profession when it is very boring and sucks. Most lawyer shows follow like a very dramatic litigator, and you know maybe 0.1% of attorneys these days have a lot of litigation going on. So I guess I'm not a huge fan of like legal shows. You know, Lost is probably one of my all-time favorites. It doesn't involve lawyers or anything. They kind of ruined it.
It starts with an L and lawyer starts with an L, so we'll give it to you. A little bending
we'll count
the lines.
That. And it's almost a cliche too. Like if you say, I'd say the first 2 seasons of Lost. I love Succession right now. That has a legal element to it. You know, this whole idea of M&As and poison pills. And I don't know if you've seen Succession on HBO, but
no, it's on our list. We'll definitely do it eventually. But
and if you like Lost, there's a new show on Apple TV that came out this year called Severance. And the premise is pretty trippy. This idea of like you enter this place of work, and when you enter it, your memories are severed. So you start off as like a new individual, and when you leave, the memories of who you are in the workplace are severed. And it's this like amazing thought experiment of like, you know, what would happen if you know this actually played out. I don't want to give anything away. But that might be like one of my new favorite shows. Again, it's called Severance. It's on Apple TV, and Apple TV has got.
Oh yeah, well, Ted Lasso. That's a whole separate conversation.
Yeah.
But that's Severance. That's the one with Adam Scott, right? The guy from Parks and Rec and Step Brothers, and
yeah, he's phenomenal. He's the lead in that show. It's phenomenal. Apple TV is just hitting home runs nonstop. Ted Lasso, you mentioned. There are a number of others, and it's my cheapest streaming subscription right now. So I'm like. They just need a little bit more content, and I'll cancel some others.
They need some help with their churn if they know where to come.
For real, yeah.
On a totally different note, what is your biggest pet peeve?
Overconfidence, I'd say. Like,
not to brag, but
I don't know. Yeah, I think dealing. You know, I work with a lot of different founders, and humility and people that are willing to acknowledge, you know, they don't know everything. That is a very underrated attribute. I don't know if you're familiar with the Dunning-Kruger effect. Dunning-Kruger effect is it's the phenomenon that the less you know about a topic, the more you think you know about that topic. It's kind of what we see on Twitter where, you know, COVID comes out and suddenly everybody's like a genius epidemiologist. And it goes to this pet peeve I have around, I'm kind of the opposite, where I've always struggled with imposter syndrome and feeling like I need to know everything about something before I can even weigh in at like a very small level. So that drives me crazy when I encounter people that are self-proclaimed experts in an area that they really haven't spent a lot of time in.
And then you moved around the time that you were starting law school. You moved to Charleston, which I still haven't been to this day, but everybody loves it. Like my old roommate, Matt, who used to like drive for his family's business all around the country, said that Charleston was like hands down his favorite city in the country. What is your favorite thing to do in Charleston that is unique to Charleston?
Our downtown area, and again, I have kids now, it's hard to get downtown. It's a small, quaint area, and it's a very unique city. It's a colonial city. We don't have many of these unique traditional colonial cities anymore. A lot of them have been overly commercialized, but just being like taking a day and exploring the downtown area, the architecture, the culture, it's all so unique. And there's not really anywhere in the US that has the same feel and culture. The beaches are 5 minutes away, which is fantastic. And there's a reason I think Charleston's become so popular. I know Condé Nast has had it at like number one cities on one of these lists for years. And we're definitely seeing that with the influx of people moving here. But it's just got a little bit of something for everybody. It's got the history and the architecture, this unique colonial vibe. Beaches are great. Cost of living is still reasonable compared to other big metro areas. Food, you'll find better food here than almost anywhere. It can rival Manhattan in terms of if you're a foodie. I hate that word, but if you're a foodie, it's a great place to be.
I love when people call me a foodie. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, no, there's something for everybody in Charleston. And if you've never been, I mean, just plan a week, do everything, do the top things, there are all these tours and things, but be a tourist, go around, take a tour of some of the old like forts and monuments and downtown areas. Yeah.
And then last one, this is on a totally different note as well. I'm throwing these all over the place random at you, but you are someone who has had times in your life when you've had a lot of doubt, and you mentioned imposter syndrome, and look back now and like you've done amazing things and created companies and like helped out so many, you can't even count how many people you've helped out and made things easier for their business. What's one quick tip for anybody who's kind of just in a place where they're doubting themselves or don't really know what's next?
I hate it when people say you just got to believe in yourself. That's not actionable.
Shout out Ted Lasso.
Believe in yourself. Yeah. Self-esteem. I even have like, if I were to go over here in my bookshelf, I have like self-esteem books that I've kept to this day because it was like a time in my life where I was like, how do you like just teach yourself that if you don't have confidence, if things have happened that have like shattered your confidence, like how do you bounce back? I even had people back then, it's worth mentioning, like one lady that worked at the law firm met me while I was doing this whole internship transition phase. And she's like, you're being a web developer? Like your parents must be so ashamed, like said that. And
oh my God.
You like
what
some
an
people,
awful person.
Yeah, I know. I would love to see her now. Some people internalize those kind of things, and I'm somebody that does that. And to get past that, like I just had to start doing. Like I just had to start building and say, screw what people think. I'm not worried about that. What's going to make me happy? What are things that, and also setting long-term plans and goals help me too as an individual to think about my own personal progress and stop thinking about what others see me as, but like, am I being the best version of myself that I want to be? That's the biggest thing that changed for me. And as you make progress in life and you have evidence that you can look at and point to, it's kind of this idea of everybody's got a negative doubting voice. And when you have evidence to the contrary, it's easy to dispel those, discouraging voices.
Holy cow. So we always wrap up with final thoughts. I think that was like a final thought.
That was my final thought. Yeah.
That was yeah. No, I really appreciate it. So we'll move the final thoughts up. You jumped the line, but Nick, thank you so much. This has been really, really cool, and just really appreciate everything you've done and kind of opening us into like the things that you've been to and how you've kind of tackled things in the past and now. And so really, really appreciate your time and insights. And where is you alluded to it earlier, but what is your Twitter handle and the place people can DM you, and anything else you want to shout out about Churnkey?
I wish I had the McLovin Twitter handle after our discussion, but I don't.
Hey, I wasn't going to make a joke about it. You joked yourself.
I threw myself out there. I do have my name. It's Nick Fogle, NickFogle, at Nick Fogle on Twitter. I keep my DMs open. If you're, a business operator, or if you're looking at starting a business, building a startup, message me. Let me know if you have questions. If you're stuck, the whole reason we're building Churnkey now, we love helping founders, and I love helping founders who are early or who are going through growing pains. Just, feel free to hit me up anytime there.
And we've never done this before, but if you want to hear the final thoughts as the last thing that Nick says, just rewind 2 minutes and then listen to the final thoughts and then skip after that. So
Cool.
Thanks so much, Nick.
Yeah, thank you, Max. This was fun.
Audiograms fly when you're having fun. As the saying goes, thank you so much, Nick, for coming on the podcast, sharing your incredible story, sharing your love for podcasters and entrepreneurs and all you do. And thank you, wild listeners, for tuning in to another episode. If you want to hear more wild stories like this one, see, I used the term story correctly in that instance. Make sure to follow the Wild Business Growth Podcast on your favorite app and tell a friend about the podcast. And then go try out Wavve with them. Go try out Churnkey with them. Maybe start a business with them. The possibilities are endless. You can also find us on Good Pods. And for any help with podcast production, you can learn more at maxpodcasting.com and sign up for the Podcasting to the Max newsletter at maxpodcasting.com/newsletter. I got very original with that. Until next time, let your business run wild.
Bring on the bongos!